Yeah, I'm with you.
All right.
He is a founding partner at Armada Law Corp and everybody's favorite foul-mouthed uncle and the man with more dirty one-liners than an EDM pre-party. Coming to the stage next, y'all know who it is. It's Dale Schafer.
Good morning, everybody. I don't have an article this morning. I got a request from Jason to look into a Supreme Court case that came down February 28th, the last day of last month. It's called the Bittner case. And it appears that Jason has people in his sphere of influence to believe this is going to change the cannabis industry's tax situation. And so I took a look at it, did some research, and this is what I got. If you don't know what 280E is, we're going to touch upon it in a minute. But the Bittner case involved a guy he came to America from Romania, got dual citizenship, went back to Romania, made a shitload of money. And there's a requirement under a federal law called the Banking Secrecy Act that you file a report once a year on all these foreign bank accounts you got. Okay. And they give all the nonsense about we're looking for money laundering and illegal activity, bullshit like that. But you have to file a report once a year. Well, he didn't do it for 5 years. So he hired an accountant. They filed it. There were some issues about accuracy, so they supplemented it. And then they got banged with penalties for not each report, but for every one of the accounts he had over those 5 years. It was a $10,000 penalty for 272 accounts. And this guy got bent over and plugged for several $1 million. And he objected and took it all the way to the Supreme Court. And Neil Gorsuch, who's one of the conservatives on the court, took a very narrow view of this statute. And to put it in my vernacular, he said, you guys are extending this bullshit way too far. The statute says if you willfully do things, we'll go each account. But if it's a non-willful, we give you $10,000 penalty per report. Okay. And what they pointed out was they use Latin, but basically if you look at one part of the statute and they use particular language and another part doesn't, they don't apply that same language to every provision. Okay. And so the willful part was per account. The non-willful was for report. And they also brought up an old principle called lenity, where there's going to be a penalty. We strictly construe against the government and in favor of the poor bastard who's going to get a penalty. Okay. So that is what I think, Jason, is going to be applied to the cannabis industry. And I then went and took a look at some of the penalties in the IRS code. And let me just tell you, taxes nauseate me. I can't stand that shit. So I send people to accountants to get all this stuff figured out. But under the IRS code, if you underpay, okay, you can get hit with a 20% penalty. If you grossly underpay, you can get with a 40% penalty. Okay. Now, how they apply that is maybe where we're going to have some issues here. If you remember the Harborside case, they got banged with considerable penalties and they managed to settle that. And I think the government was willing to look at taking away some of those penalties. You may now be able to challenge some of these if there are redundancies in these penalties. And the courts are now being instructed to look carefully at the language of this. And if it doesn't penalize for certain behavior, then don't infer that some other part of the statute makes those penalties applicable to everybody. Now, what those of us in the industry understand is that 280E is just a killer. And it came about when Ronald Reagan was president. His first year, there was a decision that allowed a drug dealer to write everything off as a normal business expense. And they said, no, bullshit. They passed 280E. So if you're running an illegal drug business with controlled substances, you're trafficking, it's a business, all you get to write off is the cost of goods sold. That's it. So what I do is I take people to an accountant who's experienced the 280E, and I have them advise them on the structure to set up, how they're going to do this for maximum 280E protection. This may be where this question is now directed, Jason, and we may be coming back to visit this because I want the accountant community and the tax attorney community to see if there's redundancies in these penalties that may now be able to be extracted out. You still may have to pay the extra tax, but the penalties could be shaved down. So that's my beginning of this discussion for today. What do you guys have to say?